Hello, everyone. Welcome back to another episode of D-Pod. Finally recording again after a busy season with retreat and everything. And here in the studio today, we have our next alumnus, I guess. Alumni is plural, right?
It's
hello,
alumni, yeah.
Hello, Matthew.
Hi.
Hello.
Yeah.
Nice. Welcome back.
Thank you.
Nice. So here we are. Matthew's a veteran. He's already been on before, but he was saying he felt nervous. So you all right now?
I'm always nervous.
You're always nervous. That's true, actually.
I'm always nervous.
Yeah. Why do you think that is?
Insecurity.
All right. We'll just leave it at that.
Yeah.
Okay. So anyways, you just updated me right now that your company had a bunch of layoffs. Oh man, how are you? That's kind of a big thing through the first time to go through that. How are you processing that? That's recent news, right? Is that
it's quite recent.
Okay,
It happened on Monday.
Okay.
So it's Wednesday now.
Thankfully, you're not affected.
I am not affected. Yes, I am still employed. Thank the Lord. Yeah, I don't know. It's a lot. I mean, typically I think engineering at my company has been less impacted than other departments, but 35% of our workforce it's kind of gone now. That
Wow.
includes a lot of my team, which is, some of those guys have been there for a decade or so now.
Wow.
I'm like, dang,
Wow.
that's a lot. And they're all like really nice and, like great mentors, super personable, and it's a lot of pressure now that they're gone.
Yeah.
Also,
There might be a part of you that wonders like, oh, how come I'm here still?
that's a big part of my thinking. Yeah.
Yeah, it's kind of interesting. It's tough. Because, I used to work in HR and just I'm familiar with these tough decisions that somehow need to be made. And sometimes it's just purely tied to financials.
Yeah.
People who've been there for a long time,
They get paid a lot
they
more.
get paid a lot more,
Yeah.
things like that. And so it's tricky. But yeah, I'm thankful, I guess, personally that you're not affected by it, but it is tough. And it just goes to show you, even like a solid job, what seemed like a solid job, like can just go away like that.
Yeah.
Anyways, we're not here to talk about your company. I guess we're here to talk about your story. So so we're going to do that. All right. So let's just start back from, when you were younger, and then we'll fast forward all the way through college and into, you as a postgrad in our ministry now. Take us through, what were you like what was young Matthew Chang like?
I guess I'll start in high school because that feels somewhat most relevant. High school, I was kind of a loner, but not really, because I made a couple pretty good friends that were like not loners. So I would just kind of be off by myself, and they'd like join me, and we'd hang out, even though I'd probably still be doing my own thing without interacting much with them. So that was kind of me, just this outgoing. I'm still kind of like this, where I'm like outgoing and I'll respond back if you talk with me. But as far as initiation goes, I'm probably more on the passive side. I'll just do my own thing, read a book or something, and not necessarily begin engagements of the social variety.
Yeah, that's interesting. So you're saying, when you say outgoing, you mean like in terms of conversation, you're willing to engage in conversation? Is that what you're saying?
Yeah. I mean, people call me like a chatterbox, right? That's kind of the view, which is not necessarily incorrect, but I am super bad at starting conversations on my own. And so I kind of need someone to be there and continue feeding into that, or else, well, there goes the conversation.
Oh, I see. Okay. Yeah. And then you went to lab schools, right?
I did. Super local.
Yeah, super local here. And when did you start lab schools again?
That was 7th grade when I moved from Texas.
Well, I guess in terms of family background, I guess a lot of people would already know, but just for people who might not, like, tell us a little bit about your family too.
Yeah. So my family is obviously super local because my dad is actually, my dad works at the University of Chicago Hospital. So like I mentioned before, I went to the lab schools, the University of Chicago Laboratory Schools. So that's obviously very close. I have one sister who also goes to UChicago now and is also part of our church. And we did grow up Christian, or at least, like our family is Christian, very Korean Christian, and so we had a very church background.
Yeah. So how has it been having your sister here as a part of our church? Sorry to put you on the spot. I don't know if people know this. I had a younger sister, who's part of our church network, but we've actually never been part of the same church.
Yeah.
Interestingly enough, my sister now serves in our New Jersey church along with my brother-in-law, but she went to San Diego for school. And then, I went to Berkeley. Yeah. But yeah, I don't know what that's like actually. So what is that like for you?
Yeah. I mean, I want to say it's weird, but it's kind of not because we've always grown up like, same youth group, right? Same church. And so this kind of feels like a continuation of that. We're like at the same church meetings. Sometimes we'll go a whole prayer meeting or something and we just won't talk to each other, but will we even acknowledge each other? I mean, we'll definitely see each other, maybe wave or something. But yeah, it just kind of feels like when you're growing up as a kid and you're like at the same, like your sibling is there with you at the church service or at the youth group meeting or whatever. Except you're in college now.
Yeah. Okay. So to me, yeah, because maybe it's hard for you to describe what it's like because that's just sort of what you've known all your life. And so, yeah, that's just interesting to me. So when I see you guys interact, it's very natural. And, you guys obviously are very fond of each other. Like, I think that's really, or Matthew just raised his eyebrows. At least one side is fond. Yeah, but for me, my sister and I are 6 years apart in age. So we've never even experienced going to the same school together.
Oh, wow.
So for me, that's actually a foreign experience. And so in that way, I think it maybe feeds into the type of relationship we have because I do think I was much more of a older brother, like almost another parent figure in her life, especially when she was growing up versus like just a friend. And so I could see also, you guys are also much more closer in age, I guess. And so it's maybe more of a friend dynamic that just comes into play there.
Yeah. I am the older one by, 2 3/4, basically 3 years, but I don't feel older most times, to be honest. It's an interesting dynamic. I'm not sure if it's exactly typical, but yeah, typically it's like the older one that's like helping the younger one or whatever, but usually it'll be like, oh, we're home alone. I'm like rooting around the fridge for something to eat, and she'll just come down and start making something and be like, go upstairs. What are you doing down
Oh
here?
my.
Like, dang.
Yeah, maybe one of these days that will flip. But well, thank you, Lauren, for taking care of Matthew.
That's it.
Yeah. Well, I know that one of the ideas we had was to bring you guys both on at the same time and have a sibling episode.
Oh, so maybe in the future.
So we'll get some more juicy details in that episode. But
now I'm scared.
I guess coming back to sort of your then spiritual background, you started mentioning how you guys grew up in church. So can you tell us a little bit more about that? What was your experience of that growing up in the church? We'll just start there. Yeah.
Yeah. Until we moved to Chicago in Texas, we were part of Soul Baptist Church, I think is the name. I Googled it at some point. Something like that. It's a very, like obviously Korean church. It was there was a lot of kids, a lot of adults, big church, very routine Sunday service feel. And there were like small groups. I remember our parents ran a small group, but then also there were youth small groups that you went to starting in like 6th grade. So I only went to 1 year of that. And that was a really good experience that I think would have been good for community, but then I obviously moved 1 year later. And so the bulk of my experience in that Korean church was just like Sunday service, go hang out until the parents are done with their service, leave. Very routine. And then coming into, Chicago, we're trying to find a new church. There's not really a Korean church. And family that lives in Chicago still goes to Willow Creek and like the Barrington and such campuses. But they do have one in downtown Chicago. So that's where we went to then for middle and high school. And that was a very different experience because downtown Chicago, like inner city, the people that went to that church were a demographic that typically didn't have kids in my sister and I's age, like middle and high school.
Yeah,
so our entire youth group, I'm talking like middle plus high school, was like 8 kids, I think, around then, hovering around there.
No, it's pretty small. Yeah.
Yeah. And there was like a lot less happening outside of Sunday service gatherings. So it was like you went there, you did your service, and then that was like it. I would call myself friends with the people there. Like we were super friendly with each other, and that was nice, but then we never interacted outside of that. I'm a bit of I don't know exactly how normal, because like I don't tend to text people or whatever, but we didn't really text each other outside of that. We didn't really interact outside of that, hang out with each other outside of that. And it was just very, we see each other and we're friendly with each other and like friends at Sundays. But then outside of that, there's that aspect of things. And so the social community aspect at our church is that we hold very core and hold a lot of importance on. I don't think I actually tended to experience that growing up. And then the actual Sunday service stuff was like kind of information, being drilled into your head. Not drilled, but you'd go over a passage, talk about it a bit, and that was sort of surface level. And so I grew up having a pretty decent knowledge of, oh, like this happens in this Bible story, this happens in this Bible story. But then that was like the extent of my immersion in that realm also. So I hesitate to call it like, you know, you don't want to overgeneralize anything, but I think I had a very vanilla kind of basic churched experience for an Asian American kid growing up in like the southern / Midwest USA. I mean, I don't know how else to phrase it. It was just like routine Sunday service. You kind of know the stories. You kind of believe like culturally and then socially, because like Christian family at home, Christian church on Sundays, but then like where does it go from there kind of?
Yeah. Well, so I'm just curious, do you think that because without comparing it to, you know, like what you experienced at our church per se, but just like, do you think that your experience of church being just primarily Sunday, does that reflect more on what was offered? Is that reflective of what's offered at the church, or was that reflective of like maybe a choice that you made? The reason I ask is because for me, when I reflect back on my youth experience now, I very much had a just Sunday only experience, but I was actually like 75% because of me. Because I think the church, and when I reflect back on how actually the other friends, like I had a bit bigger youth group than you did, but there were more people that were friends and they saw each other actually throughout the week. I was one of the odd ones out that I was just busy. I had ROTC stuff on Friday nights. I never stayed after on Sunday. You know, my parents would take me back so I could study. So like a lot of it was that I opted out of those experiences, which is then, during the time I remember feeling, oh, I'm not close to any of my church friends. But then when I reflect back on it, it was like, at least I share at least over half the blame with regards to that. So I'm just curious, because it could have been also because you were at the smaller kind of downtown, the demographics thing was that's interesting observation. So it could have been that, but just curious what your reflections are on that.
Yeah, I mean, I think part of it, I guess first off, to get this out of the way, I don't think there were actually, my memory's awful, famously awful, but I don't think that there were any official church offerings outside of Sunday for our youth group. But that being said, I do think it would have been like 6 of one, half a dozen of the other, in that all of us were like going to this one downtown campus area. But I live in Hyde Park. So that's like already a 20 to 30 minute drive just to get there. And then they all come from other areas that were like maybe near downtown or like a little bit further, but like Chicago was that central hub. It wasn't necessarily exactly where they lived. And honestly, I don't even know where they lived. So I'm just guessing at that point, but I'm just guessing like there wasn't much initiative on any of our parts to get close to each other. And so that being said, even if there were, I probably also would have been in your shoes where I'm given where I was in high school and such, where I was like, oh, more often than not, I think if I were asked for any social event or whatever, if it wasn't just like a small group hangout, I'd probably say no, in all honesty, whether that was like for an activity or extracurricular or just to, I'm not comfortable in big social things like that, so I'm just not going to go kind of thing.
Yeah, that's interesting.
Yeah.
Yeah. And the thing is, even, okay, hey, you guys should intentionally try to get to know each other. I think that is something that we need to be taught. A lot of people don't find that to be intuitive. A lot of people, what we hear from the culture or maybe even from our families is that you really invest time into family, but not really into, outsiders, or, it was something I was taught growing up is you should just invest into people who can like benefit you. So like instead of investing in my church friends, I should really invest in some of my smartest friends at school who are actually going to get far in life. So it was sort of that kind of mentality, which was sort of drilled into me that I had to unlearn later on. Yeah, all that to say, like that has to be intentionally taught to people, and perhaps, that wasn't as intentionally taught.
Yeah, for sure.
So how would you characterize like your people, mixed experiences growing up in church and what they learned and things like that? But I think in large, there's my reflections again on it has been that a lot of it's me that can't receive the things that are trying to be taught. But so what did you take away from your youth group experience as you think about how your spiritual journey has progressed from there? What do you think your youth group experience provided for you in terms of a foundation or something that you could kind of go off of?
Yeah, I think first of all, just spiritually, this idea that no matter our differences, we kind of have, as long as we have this shared identity of Christians, we can kind of get along and get to know each other. And, obviously, like we didn't really get to know each other too well. But I remember during those Sunday services, or like when we went to retreats, we would be able to bond and to share and kind of be vulnerable with each other to an extent that I think if it were just like, say, Boy Scouts or something, some other guys who I would get together for an obligation once every week, I would not have gotten that close and would not have interacted with them in that same way without that shared identity. So I think having that conception of, hey, regardless where you go, if these people are Christian and if you have that shared identity and can relate through that lens, there's a lot of potential for fellowship and bonding in that way. I think that was something very important, especially since I typically find it, again, very hard to like socially open up to new people or get to know new groups. And so having that idea that, hey, those barriers aren't as close, aren't as high when there's other Christians you're interacting with, I think was very important for me. Additionally, spiritually shaping, I think, plainly put, having that routine Sunday service knowledge kind of put in my head was good in that it got me accustomed to the sorts of knowledge and sorts of things you would find in the gospel, and it got me that kind of base grounding. Quite bluntly put, I think without having been raised a Christian, I'm not the kind of person that would become Christian. I don't think I would, like, if you outreach to me on campus, I would be the kind to take the flyer, put it on my desk, and never look at it until I threw it away while cleaning up.
Yeah.
I wouldn't go to any events that were offered because I'm like, oh, it's this weird event offered by some group. I'm not going to go there by myself because why would I go to a group event with a bunch of randos with just by myself for no reason? Yeah.
What do you believe?
Yeah, exactly. Just outreach would be very hard to get through to me. And then, that's even without getting into the ideas that are actually core to Christianity, which I think would be a lot harder to internalize and accept if I weren't Christian to begin with or raised up in that background.
Yeah. Yeah, that's interesting to me because like like people who grew up in church, sometimes it's, we hear this term thrown around a lot, like deconstruction, right? That's sort of in vogue right now in Christian circles, and it's referring to this process that a lot of people go through, like where you grew up in church and then you don't realize why you believe what you believe, right? And so then people have placed the term so you deconstruct every piece of, okay, so why is it that I believe this, and why do I have to do this? And so then they deconstruct. And so then that's becomes sort of synonymous in our culture for like then people losing their faith as a result of that. And it's kind of an interesting phenomenon to me because I don't think that, and so therefore deconstruction within Christianity, it sort of has a bad rap, and it sort of, is being associated with a lot of these like celebrity Christians who lose their faith and things like that. And so the deconstruction is this scary thing. But no, so from my perspective, another perspective to that would be, no, well, every Christian needs to deconstruct, or every person who grew up in church needs to deconstruct, quote unquote, because you have to figure out why you believe what you believe. And I think when I think about my journey, that's basically what I went through in my college years. It's, okay, so why am I going to church? To go through that process. And, I'm sure you had to go through that process too. Why am I saying all this? Basically, it's because once we deconstruct, we have to reconstruct, right? Like the deconstruction is so that we can understand the elements, and then we reconstruct our faith and it becomes ours, right? And it becomes stronger as a result. And so sometimes when people think about their years in youth group, or no matter what kind of church background you had, sometimes you can look at that and just look at the negative sides of it. Oh, what I didn't understand, like these are the things that this church didn't teach me, or these are the things that they overemphasized and that really caused me to have a wrong gospel understanding. Okay, yeah, that might exist. And yet my experience in reflecting about this is that, well, there's also a lot that they gave you. There's a lot that they gave you that we can't take for granted. And it's sort of what you're saying, like, because I feel the very much the same way that if I hadn't learned a lot of these stories and values and a deep conviction that the things of God are generally good, right? Even if I wasn't sure how to explain it yet, if I didn't have some of those kinds of baseline convictions, it would have been a lot harder for me to even investigate with a clear head. And I think it made me in some ways more open-minded to the things of God, even if it wasn't mine yet, right? And yeah, anyways, just your experience resonates a lot with mine. Yeah. So let's talk about, okay, so how would you summarize like your spiritual state coming into college then? Okay, so let's kind of talk about lab school. As you got into UChicago, you're going to go all of one block to college, and it's going to be awesome, right? So you come into college. Actually, before we get to your spiritual journey, let's just talk about that transition. How were you feeling about coming to UChicago from lab schools?
That's hard to describe, I guess.
Was it your top choice?
It was my I applied ED
Okay.
actually.
Oh, you did? Okay. Yeah.
For a variety of reasons. I applied as an English major actually because I still had thoughts like, oh, maybe I could try and get some job in the publishing industry or the editing, book editing, because I really like to read. And then I was also interested in econ, and then there was some family stuff going on, and it was really close by, and then et cetera, et cetera. Thoughts on UChicago specifically? I don't really know if there were too many. I felt a little weird about being so super close to my family because I'm so super close to my family.
You're like 7 blocks away.
Yeah, it's pretty rough, but it was kind of nice. I think my main thoughts were the typical college thoughts though, of just like new era in my life, going to try and reconstruct myself a bit, try and approach things and get off on a better first foot than I did in high school and middle school and so on and so forth. Just, yeah, trying to treat it as that sort of new start that I think a lot of people tend to approach college as. Yeah.
Well, yeah. What were some of those new starts that you wanted?
I think first and foremost, I was really aware of myself being super socially isolated and the kind of person that didn't really try new things, was just kind of coasting through life. And so I wanted to try doing a lot of things to figure out kind of what I liked, which ended up being it ended up being a big spiritual blocker for me, but I also think it was good to experience that. I guess we'll go into that later.
Yeah.
It was also just things like trying to take more care of myself and, dress better than I did in middle school and high school, where it was just whatever the parents bought me, et cetera, kind of image reinventing plus trying new things. Yeah. Yeah. I think that would kind of summarize it up if I had to boil it down to those 2 points. Yeah.
Okay. And then, so then coming into college, then what would you describe your spiritual state then?
Oh, yeah. That was a lot. I guess for context, as I am right now, I would say that I had made my salvation decision already during high school, but then throughout my high school experiences, I had a lot of friends who kind of started coming out and professing, along the LGBTQ plus scale. And so I was trying to think really hard about Christianity in relation to that. And I felt a little uneasy about asking my church or youth group leaders for that knowledge on what their views, et cetera, were. And so I was doing a lot of online research and getting a lot of conflicting opinions from conservative and then liberal Christians, et cetera, and all that entire wacky scale. So I was feeling very kind of lost and not sure exactly what Christianity was in relation to kind of modern, I don't know, concepts / ways of social waves. And so my current state then, my past state, I don't know what I just said. My past state then was this kind of stagnant, I do believe in God, but I'm not sure exactly what that means or how to apply that or live that out. So I'm just going to, I believe in God, good for me, put a pause sign on that, good enough for now, come back to it after college, after I get a job, after things kind of stabilize and I'm better able to bandwidth redirect from all of this, all the exciting college stuff into something that's, that all frees up and I can put that back into discovering this. So that is to say my spiritual state was not too great.
Okay. Yeah. No, thanks for sharing that. I wanted to just a follow-up question on something you said, and I'm just curious about because as you were saying, you had various friends who were coming out, on the LGBTQ plus scale, and so you had questions about that, and then you mentioned that that's not something you wanted to bring up with church people. Was there a reason for that? I'm just curious. It's a very relatable, I guess, sentiment. But in the way it played out for you, were there some signals that you were getting from church that you shouldn't bring those up, or was it like some assumptions that you had, or you're just curious why that in your mind wasn't the option you wanted to take?
Yeah, there was a couple things in there. One of them I think was kind of fear. Just like, I think the gut feeling I had was more on the side of, okay, that's kind of a sin, and I didn't really know where to go from there. But I was afraid that, if I ask and I get this confirmed, suddenly I have to action on that, or not action, but shift mentally on that, et cetera, et cetera. And so I didn't want to kind of commit in that sense, which is one of the things, but there was more. I think part of it was a trust issue, to be honest. Not even trust in like that, trust in them as people, but kind of a competence trust issue.
Oh, I see.
My youth group leader was super nice, absolutely loved her. But because our youth group was so small and we combined middle and high school, the Sunday services tended to be on the more basic, kind of Joylandish side of things, which was not super spiritually filling or not super intellectually stimulating per se as a high schooler. And so I was, oh, is she going to know the answer? Or so there was that aspect of things.
And Joyland, for people who might not know, that is, it used to be what we called our kids program at our church. So that's what you're referring to when you say it was more Joylandish. Yeah.
And
but I guess that was sort of, it was, and that's totally understandable where you're coming from. But it is, I guess, on your end. It's like in your mind.
Oh yeah.
And so then you just don't want to like open that can of worms, basically. Okay. Yeah, that's interesting. Yeah.
I guess that's kind of what it all boils down to, basically. It was like those 2 points. There's some other stuff, but that could all kind of probably be brought back to those two in some way or another.
Yeah. Yeah, and it's understand. I mean, because it's such a, I mean, it's not just that issue. I mean, anything that's a hot topic or that could be viewed as, oh, why are you bringing that up? I mean, the church has sort of, unfortunately, maybe like a stereotype, or kind of people assume that's going to be the response that you receive, because maybe enough people have gotten those kinds of responses and we hear about it. And, I think that's unfortunate. And and so I guess for people who are listening to this, I would want people to also know that those kinds of really tough issues, like life, like culture issues, like how do we live this out and how do we relate to people, like these kinds of sensitive things, they're things that we are happy to talk about, right? And I would want people to know that. Some people might ask, hey, how come we don't address those things more publicly at Sunday service, for example? And my reason for that, so I don't know what other people's reasons are. My reason for that in our context is that I have a very small number of sermons that I get with all the college students. So essentially it comes down to about 27 sermons a year, right? Because people are here for 3 quarters and each quarter is 9 weeks. And, but if you throw in, things and stuff like that, really you can only get it like maybe 7, like holidays and stuff, right? 7 Sundays a quarter, right? So it's like a little over 20 sermons. And so for me, like, I really want to hit kind of what we would call primary issues with regards to gospel, sin, creation, lordship. So I really try to stay within the bounds of that. And then the kind of secondary teachings around things that are more culture related or even maybe like theological in nature, but are not primary gospel issues. We try to cover those things in times that are outside, like either through small groups or one-on-one conversations, midweek gatherings and things like that. And I would really encourage for people to bring those kinds of things up, because I think those conversations are crucial, but I don't want to use Sunday service, for example, airtime to address those issues.
So for sure.
Just throwing in my few thoughts there around that. Yeah. So coming to college, you're looking for a church, or
no?
Oh, you're not looking for a church.
No, I was like,
so
no active religion until after college, basically.
Okay. So you were pretty much ready to just quit, like for the time being.
For the time being, with air quotes, because let's be real, if I quit, I probably wasn't going to start up again.
Oh, I see. Interesting. Okay, so then what happened?
Well, I live in Chicago, and I live in Hyde Park, so I'm a native, and it's move-in day, and I got a new roommate. So, hey, want me to show you around campus? Oh, yeah, sure. I'm walking around campus, and then we see this table, and there's like a bunch of donuts. These people are there, and they're just handing them out left and right. Oh, donuts, free donuts, let's go. Walking up. Get some donuts, start talking a little bit. It's Ben, Lou, and Noah came. Oh, yeah. I'm talking to Ben, and then he brings up, I'm like, so why are you guys, I'm paraphrasing because I don't remember exactly how the conversation goes, but something along the lines of, so what are you guys doing out here handing donuts for? Oh, actually, we're part of this church, which is handing out, some flyers, doing some welcome week stuff. Are you interested? Are you looking for a church? My internal monologue is now panicking as I'm realizing, oh, shoot. This is as close to a sign from God as I'm probably going to get for the next 4 years. I can't really say no, since I'm still internally thinking of myself as a practicing Christian. And so I say yes. And then because I say yes, obviously that means I have to actually show up. And then, first sermon, it's you talking about how Christians need to stick together with their shared identity to resist the school's Babylon-esque brainwashing into not being Christian. And I'm feeling super targeted, but also
the Daniel message. Yeah. Oh my gosh.
So I'm feeling super targeted and end up being like, all right, I guess I just got to stay now, huh?
Oh, that's interesting. Yeah. I mean, I knew that before, but wow, never so colorfully narrated by you before.
Very, very vivid memory for me.
Wow. Yeah. Hey, praise the Lord for that, man. Praise the Lord for those donuts. Yeah, that's funny. I actually remember that first Sunday where you showed up, and it was really, it was funny. I know we've told this story before, but you happened to walk in with a set of parents, which I assumed was your parents. And so we're like, oh, hi, welcome, whatever. We're like introducing her. Oh, is this your son? They're like, we don't know that kid. And you're like, I don't know these people. I was like, oh, where's your child? And then turns out their kid was like, 30 feet behind because he was getting a welcome gift or something. I forget what happened.
He also got distracted walking into looking at the art.
Oh, yeah. That's funny. So you through all of that, you started coming out to our church. So tell us about what was the spiritual progress that happened over the next couple of years? Like, what would you say was like kind of the big defining moments in your college career with regards to spirituality?
Oh, man. Very slow progress, to be perfectly honest. I think the first probably major thing would have been around second year. I was in a dorm apartment. It was COVID year. I was in a dorm apartment with some friends from my kind of major friend group at that time, which was the classic first year dorm friend group that always forms. And there was, surprise, some relational drama that quickly expanded into serious drama. And it was very much a bit of a turnoff for me, just given how people were interacting with each other and how the situation was handled. And I remember I was kind of going to, small groups and other stuff at that time. And there was a fair amount of support and kind of good advice given to me by other people that were there and older mentors. And that was probably the first time where I found myself kind of coming closer to church as opposed to more secular other friend groups. So that was probably the first milestone.
So if I'm hearing that, it was just the pain of your primary reference group was this kind of dorm group of friends, but then there was some pain there because of this drama that was happening. And so then that caused you to withdraw from that group? Is that what happened? Or
I guess it was, yeah. Yeah, I guess, yeah. Yeah, I think that's a pretty decent way to phrase that. Yeah.
Okay.
Sure, yeah.
Okay, yeah.
So that was like me actually spending more time with people in church.
Oh, I see. Okay.
Yeah, and kind of pushed me towards that realm of things. And then obviously, we had started DT groups up around then or before then actually, but that was also another way where we were getting kind of closer to each other and kind of sharing about our lives with each other. And I remember those as being pretty sweet times, even if it was very, I don't know, 7 a.m. groggy. Can't really remember exactly what happened, but the overall, oh yeah, that was good kind of feel.
Wait, we met you at 7 a.m. for DT?
No, it was the one where we were meeting on our own.
Oh, but you guys met at 7 a.m.
Yeah.
That was early.
It was like 7 or 8 a.m. It was early morning.
That was
classes.
ambitious.
Yeah, that was
oh, because people were busy during the day.
Yeah, exactly.
That's why. Okay, yeah, that's right. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's cool. Yeah.
And then besides that, I think end of third year spring retreat, that's where I made my lordship decision. I had been, like I mentioned before, very busy with all of these new things that I had started trying in college and found myself unable to really back out of. And so the big primary struggle for me then was actually making it to retreat. Because, first and second year, I'd been, whatever, I'm just going to go hang out with people as opposed to going to this or that retreat. I go to Sunday service, what's a retreat kind of thing. But then third year, I was like, at this point, I was going to more small group stuff. I was feeling more like maybe I should. But then also, I had this other really big commitment. And so I was like, no, I just can't make retreat this year. And that ended up being a very hard decision for me to make. But then once we were there was a very good message about lordship making Jesus the center of your life. And I was reflecting on how hard it had been just to get to that retreat and then a bunch of other things that I was doing that were absolutely crowding out other church involvement for me and spiritual growth opportunities for me. So I was very convicted at that time and made my lordship decision. And then I'd say probably the final kind of quote unquote milestone, probably generalizing here, would be end of fourth year when things were starting to free up. I was still dying in classes, but generally whatever, my GPA is good enough at this point kind of vibe. And then looking at our younger bros and saying, hey, I need to get to know you guys better. And so we ended up going to get late night pretty much every night for a consecutive month. And then we racked up 6 hours of close conversation in travel time alone, which was
that's awesome.
It was very good for
very
us
memorable.
Spiritually and emotionally. I'm not so sure about physically.
Yeah, not so sure physically, man. Yeah, that's a sacrifice. Yeah,
it's a sacrifice. Yeah. A hard thing for those guys.
Oh man.
Yeah,
that's so interesting. So coming out of your junior year lordship, well, what you're describing as your lordship decision. So what could you tell me about? So what was that decision for you? Like, and what came out of that? So I guess on two levels, like internally, what was the decision? Like if you had to try to describe that, and then how did that work itself out in your life?
Yeah. I think like I mentioned, the main meat of the decision was giving Jesus primacy of my life, that center aspect. I had been thinking of Jesus as a really important part of my life, as church is this important part of my identity, but it was not the central core. And so what that looked like to me was just saying no to certain offerings, meetings, opportunities to even fellowship for other things that were, not spiritual.
Yeah.
And then what that change then looked was just very practically speaking, doing the opposite and saying yes to going to prayer meetings, saying yes to go to DTs, to small group times, to Saturday hangouts and fun trips over other things and other meetings with other friends, et cetera, which was kind of a hard shift for me to make.
Yeah, that's interesting. Yeah. Because, we talk about lordship a lot. And I guess because of also the Luke, we've been going through the Gospel of Luke for Sunday services. So that topic's come up a lot for us in our Sunday services just this past year. And it's one of these things where, we kind of talk about lordship as a concept because I think it's a concept that a lot of people are not aware of or missing in their mind. So that's why we call that out. But it's interesting because it's not really like if you think about I guess the decision to follow Christ, it really ought not to be a separate concept. It really ought to be like one and the same thing. But I guess it just helps to talk about it on its own. And so for me, like in my journey too, I guess because we both grew up in like Korean American church traditions. And so I had this very similar experience of, I understood a lot in like youth group. I would have described myself as a Christian. In some ways, I'm actually still slightly confused. Okay, so did I become a Christian in middle school, in high school, or in college? Like for me, sometimes that's unclear depending on how I talk about it. Like they all kind of make sense.
Yeah.
All I know is that by college, I really made a decision. I had all the pieces at that point. And it just, from there, it's been a matter of working that out. So anyways, I just want to appreciate that kind of difficulty in your story too, because you like knew a lot of stuff, and then there was this really important aspect of following Jesus that wasn't clear or got clarified like a little bit later on. So since then, obviously you stayed after graduation. You're a member now at our church, serving in kind of a youth ministry capacity here. And so could you tell us a little bit about what was behind the decision to stay around? I know, your family's around here and stuff, so maybe that, that makes things more natural too. But like, what was sort of your thought process behind that?
Yeah. I always feel a little sheepish answering this question because I think usually people have stories about wrestling with X, Y, or Z, but that kind of wasn't the case for me.
Okay.
I mean, like I said, I absolutely love our community and I felt very cared for, and I felt like I had strong relationships with a lot of the staff and other members of the church. I also, like you mentioned, I have family that's still very nearby. So that's not strictly a plus, but it is not a negative either. So it was a factor for sure. And then I also had a remote job offering. That is, stay in a place where I have people that I know, including family members, without having to move. It felt very, okay, well, that's kind of an easy decision to make. I don't feel like I'm really giving up anything. So that's probably why I made the decision to stay in Chicago. And then to continue serving was just wanting to continue to grow, I guess, and having seen and acknowledged that I do have a lot of spiritual growth to go. And I kind of need to be in the church to continue on that path. Yeah.
Yeah. So right now you're, living with... So your living situation is a little different because before you, I guess, lived with like college friends around the same age. Now you're in a living situation with some other of the single brothers in our ministry. And a lot of them are a little older than you, right? So what's that? Tell me about that experience. What's that been like?
I've been really enjoying it, actually.
Okay. Yeah.
It always kind of surprises people because it's, there's 6 guys in one house and you have 2 bedrooms that you guys use, like a bunch of bunk beds. You're in a room with 4 guys, like 3 other guys. What?
Yeah.
I'm like, I don't know. I like it.
Yeah. I mean, I used to live in a house of 26 guys. I mean, I don't know what's wrong with 6.
What's the problem?
It's only 6 guys.
Yeah. Just from a purely spiritual perspective, having older guys to count on for advice and then discipline, Monday morning DTs, we do them together as a house. That's very routine, but also regulated. And regulated is the wrong word. Regulated sounds too draconian and authoritarian. But having that structure, that scaffolding of a regular spiritual aspect of our day-to-day life is very important. Even when I was trying to live with Guba and some other guys in 3rd and 4th year, we never actually, we tried kind of doing morning DTs, but we never made it a strict regular thing. And so that ended up never happening, basically. And I'm still kind of like that, where I need things to be structured. I need things to be kind of laid out so that I'll do them. Because on my own, I have the initiative of a goldfish on dry land and just won't do anything.
Yeah.
And I need that kind of structure. So I've been very much enjoying that. And then, obviously, like, people that are older, they know how to live as adults. They know how to cook. They we do have set cleaning days.
You have some good cooks in that house.
Yeah, it's been great. I've been learning a lot also. And so it's been just, in terms of lifestyle alone, that's just been, I'm not going to get this from living with some other rando 20-something-year-old who's also on his first job or whatever. Yeah. And they're nice people. They're fun people. We play board games a lot. I can talk with them. Is that
what's your favorite house activity? Is it board games?
Favorite house? Yeah. It's board games.
Okay.
Of course.
What is the board game of choice right now?
Board game of choice right now. We've been playing a lot of Star Wars, the deck building game, but we recently bought Pokemon Splendor, which is this Pokemon branded version of the Splendor game, which was only made and produced in South Korea.
Oh, interesting.
So it is all in Korean, but because it's Splendor, you don't need to read it all to play the game.
Nice.
I played it once, but that was a lot of fun.
I'm not familiar with Splendor at all, so I have no idea what that means, but I'll trust that it's fun. Yeah.
It was a good game.
And then what's been like, I guess what's different is, because it's weird because I hear a lot, and I guess I experienced this too, but like when you go from undergrad to postgrad, you're like, oh man, the experience is different. And you get to, so just tell me a little bit about that. Have you experienced that?
Oh yeah.
What's been the change? What's different? Just what are your thoughts around that?
I mean, everything's different. Everything's
different. It's just a different church. This is actually like everything nothing that you thought you knew is actually true.
Maybe not that everything.
Okay.
Like almost everything.
That's a big word. That's a big word, man. Yeah, talk about that.
First of all, no longer in school. And I mean, not only no longer at school, no longer at UChicago. So no classes, no extracurriculars. That's kind of a lot of time, even with your job. And I think that frees up a lot for more church involvement and more ministry. Besides hanging out with the guys, doing our remote work, I'm just involved in a lot more ministry as part of being a member, and like staff development and such. And there's a lot more of that spiritual, like I mentioned earlier, spiritual blending into my day-to-day life, which is really good. And I think, personally speaking, I used busyness. I didn't use it. It was kind of a fact, but I did use it as a bit of an excuse to kind of slow spiritual growth, just being like, oh, I don't have as much time to read this equipping book or learn this skill because I have this schoolwork and this extracurricular, even, which I'm already giving up a lot of other stuff to go to our small groups or whatever. So now that's no longer there. I'm having a lot more time to grow, a lot more time to kind of, to grow, to try and equip myself. And I'm also running a lot more into facing myself, I guess, and finding out the ways that, just because that stuff is gone does not mean those obstacles are gone. Now I'm having to face a lot more, in school, there's a lot of systemic obstacles, but those are gone now. And I have to face myself as this failure of a person who needs God's grace. I'm a lazy, selfish, prideful, angry bum of a guy who needs to get over himself and become more spiritual. And that's definitely been the biggest change, I think, is just being kind of more aware of that and facing into that more and trying to overcome that more in an active way, if that makes sense. Just, having those excuses kind of stripped away and being able to fully invest in myself and my spiritual growth. Yeah.
So how is it that you realize those things? You kind of said all these like negative adjectives, right? So is it because in college you had more excuses and so that's why I'm not blank? But is it that even with all the more time, you still experience yourself not being able to blank? Is that why?
Or I'm having difficulties with X or Y, like personal, take like relationships, for example. It'd be like, I am relationally cold and isolated because I am spending time working on schoolwork. No, I'm relationally cold and isolated because I'm a relationally cold and isolated guy who just does my own thing.
Okay, so now that the excuse that you've given yourself is gone, like you kind of have to just say, well, it's just me.
Yeah, exactly. Okay, and then also just there's more time being myself and not being a student, which means more times messing up. Like student lunch, I am going to go between classes to pick up a food truck sandwich and then go to my next class and eat it on the way. Now lunch, I am in the kitchen arguing with Hal over how we should use old rice or new rice. And this is totally hypothetical. We haven't argued over this specifically, but there's just more being genuine and therefore seeing my own.
So I guess part of it is that you're interacting with people more often.
Yeah, I guess that's more I'm living life as opposed to dying in school.
Yeah. No, it is something. I appreciate that observation though, because I think that's part of what we're trying to communicate to students too, though, is that look, like you do have to think about these things now because it's not like it's going to change all that much. It's not actually. In some ways, it'll get exposed more later on, like the various deficiencies that we have, right? Everything from moral deficiency is what we would call sin to non-moral deficiencies like character, relational deficiencies, or, and we think that if we were to remove, because I guess up until college, all your life is school, right? And people who are at UChicago, like they had hard school, most of their life. And so then, but anyways, like getting rid of that is not going to solve it necessarily.
Yeah. And then there's also the aspect of, okay, now I have time to focus on these things to try and address them. In school, it was just like, if I really bunker down and focus on trying to work on this aspect of my life, I should make progress. But now I'm saying, oh no, progress is hard to make. It's kind of slow. And sometimes it feels like I'm actually backsliding in some ways. And it's just this hard struggle against X or Y sin that I'm really trying to deal with now. And just becoming more real in that sense. Yeah.
That's cool. So is there anything in terms of your experience of our church that as a undergrad, you wish you had gotten, like you had seen earlier as you kind of experienced postgrad life? I don't know if there's anything like that where you feel like, that would have been really good to know, like as an undergrad, or it would have been good to experience that.
Dang. I think, oh man. I think for one, just kind of showing appreciation. I think I kind of, you understand on an intellectual level, I'm ungrateful. I'm probably taking some things for granted. I should be more appreciative. Or, I am grateful to the staff for X, Y, or Z. But then just really graduating and then seeing all the work they put in, all the hours and like effort that is put into even something super small, relatively speaking, grow groups is just wow. that's really impressive and really hard. And
Oh, interesting.
these students, wow.
Yeah.
It's not like they're ungrateful, but I think just not having grasped the magnitude of what goes into everything, I feel like that's something I kind of wish I had known. So I could express gratitude for it while being a recipient of it still. What else? I guess taking, I don't know, student privileges in terms of being able to take ownership of your relationships and fellowship, I guess. That's a lot of words that come together, and I'm not sure if they make sense when put together.
Yeah, I'm not sure what you mean.
I guess as staff, we're happy. I say we now. I'm not sure if that's still fully, but we're happy when students want
to. You're on our side now.
Yeah. We're like happy when students want to get together and hang out. And I think that my perspective, at least, I guess it's probably different for the guys and the girls, maybe because the guys are more spread out under some, at IIT and stuff. But my point is, when students kind of get together and take their own initiative and try to do things together, whether that's DT, just fellowship, or some sort of outreach, that's really nice. And I feel like nice is probably too understated a word, but that's very encouraging to see. And I kind of just took it for granted that church stuff would be driven by the staff, driven by the church, I think, to some extent. And if you're willing to try and start that and engage in that or do something, the staff will give you their support and they'll help you and give you advice and stuff. And I don't know if that's maybe just kind of my experience, because I definitely heard stories of like staff and stuff and even current students doing kind of initiatives like Course 101 teaching, for example, but something along those lines where students kind of interacting with each other and coming together as kingdom workers, as well as
just fellowship
is just very encouraging to see, and is something that people should think about.
Yeah. Okay.
Dang.
Yeah, that's interesting. It wasn't what I intended for the question, but it ended up being sort of advice that you would give.
Yeah.
Because it's sort of, so on the one hand, you wish you had appreciated what it takes to put on ministry events. There's that. And I guess the other side of that I'm hearing is, we should entrust that more to our students, actually. I feel like there's no reason why like the juniors, the upperclassmen get together and put on like one of our voyage gatherings or something like that. And they run it. And so then maybe some of that just, you get to see kind of what it takes like ahead of time, right? Maybe even there's that aspect. And then, and then what you're saying about, like we're not here to just, we need a monopoly on putting on events and we need to drive your spiritual life. No, what we actually want is like every person to really own their spiritual life and then to take ownership over each other, to have that kind of open and honest relationship, even amongst the students. And that is what we hope for. And when we see that, it's really awesome. Yeah, that's cool, man. So okay, why don't we end with this? Okay. Yes. If you just, any final words or advice that you would want to give to our undergrad population here, UChicago, IIT, UIC now, because Alana comes out too.
That's right.
Yeah. What advice would you give with regards to college years?
I think very heavily about what you prioritize, to what degree and why, and where you are investing in. This was, as I have kind of beaten to a dead horse at this point, a very important concept for me to wrap my head around for my lordship. But there's only so much time, especially time that you have in college. And obviously, certain things are important to do. Don't fail out of college. But there are a lot of, I think, sweet memories as well as really cool things you can do for ministry or just with each other and just a purely experiential level that I think you can only really do in college. And that requires you to invest in each other and invest in your relationships and invest in your spiritual growth. And I don't know, it's easy to just kind of say, I'm doing my bid, I'm doing my DT, I'm maybe even reading some book that was recommended. But I would encourage you to think about what it might look like if you broke out of that routine and kind of, I don't know, pioneered or took into ownership what that might look like. There's a lot of experiences and access that I think I no longer have, even as an alum who is still pretty closely connected with people at the school that I knew. But even then, I've lost access in a lot of ways. And there's a lot of opportunities that I'm just not going to have again. And we say this a lot, but it really is a once in a lifetime experience that you should kind of consider what that means if you haven't before. Because I know I definitely hadn't while I was still being told that.
Yeah. Yeah. And then for someone to actually do what you're advising, which is to really consider how they're going to use their college years and figure out prioritization, basically, right? When your typical UChicago student is like drowning in schoolwork, or at least experientially so, what's that going to take, and what comes to mind is, it's going to take a very firm grasp on who you are and what you're ultimately called to do. Because if you don't have a firm grasp on Christ's call on you, then your default calling and identity will become whatever UChicago says you are. And what UChicago says you are is that you're a student, and obviously you are a student, but that whole culture that we have at this school of, if you're not giving every waking hour to your studies, then there's something wrong with you. So there's that identity. And then there's the identity that the world gives you, which is that you have to be someone who's caught up with, whatever it is for you, entertainment or extracurricular. And unless you have some set number of hours where you're doing that, you're like a loser and a failure or something like that. And these kinds of things come in, and then they're going to overtake any chance that Christ has to form you into a blessing on this campus. And like your advice, I really resonate with that. And yet at the same time, I'm just like, oh man. So that what it's going to take is it's going to take someone to really understand you are not what UChicago says. You are not what the world says you are. You're not what your friends do. You have to really start your journey around what Christ says you are, and make all other decisions based on that.
Yeah.
Yeah. Any last thoughts?
I guess just kind of a follow-up to what you said, I would actually add in that you're not even who you say you are. I think for me that's something I've been grappling with a lot in my last couple years at college, as well as after graduating, is just pride and being like, I don't really consider myself to be a really prideful person, but on a lot of reflection, I totally am. And so there are many ways in which I could be like, oh, I don't think X, Y, or Z blanket statements would apply to me, but they totally do in small other ways. It was just, I don't know. Self-reflection is really important, and I think that's a very good start to get on this journey that DP mentioned. If you're not journaling, or if you're not journaling heavily, I would recommend doing so, and journal well. Don't just keep a diary. Actually think. Small things that I think are very easy to think that we do when we're actually not sure what it is we're not doing. You're mistaken about that kind of thing. Yeah.
Yeah. Nice. All right. Well, thanks, Matt, for your time. All right.
Yeah, thank you.
All right. Thanks, everyone, for joining us for another episode of Deep Pod. Hopefully you enjoyed that conversation with Matt. Yeah, we talked about all sorts of things in that one. It was juicy. So thank you. Thank you for all that content, Matthew. All right. We'll see you guys next time.